When you meet
Even
the
this one.
non-Muslims, strike their throats.
I don't know where it says that. If you show me evidence it says that in
Surah Muhammad ayah 4. I can play it for you. Would you like to hear it?
Come on, play for it. No, I like to hear it.
الذين كفروا فضرب الرقاب حتى. Beautiful, no?
Yeah, I mean, no commenting and no comment.
He's taking the fit on the Quran, Habibi.
Joseph Cohen is the founder of the Israel Advocacy Movement, an organization focused on confronting anti-Semitism and anti-Israel narratives both online and in the public sphere. Over the past decade, he's been on the front lines, engaging directly with activists, challenging misinformation, and documenting what's really being said in protests and public discourse. Joseph, thank you very much for joining me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for hosting me.
You've spent years confronting anti-Israel narratives directly, both online and in person. From your perspective today, are we winning or losing the narrative battle?
I think there's two worlds. There's the diaspora world, Jews outside of Israel, and there's Jews inside of Israel. Inside Israel, Israel has never looked stronger. Its military is protecting its people on multiple fronts and exceeding every expectation. Outside of Israel is a different story, though. I can't remember in my lifetime even remotely coming as close to as bad as it is today. It's not just coming from one place. It's the far left, the far right, radical Islam. It's every direction the Jewish person turns, there's hate bearing down on them.
So what do you believe are some of the biggest misconceptions about Israel today?
The biggest misconception is that it can be undone. If you take 5 minutes strolling down Tel Aviv beach, walking through the beautiful old city streets of Jerusalem, you realize that these are a people that aren't going anywhere. This is a country that isn't going anywhere. And when you hear chants on the streets of the West, America, Britain, calling for from the river to the sea, the destruction of the Jewish state, you realize what a total fantasy this is. People are living in an alternate reality. I mean, even at the moment, as we speak, a huge percentage of the world believes that Benjamin Netanyahu is dead. They believe that Tel Aviv has been razed to rubble. I was there a couple of days ago. It's not razed to rubble. It's fine. And so I think there are many people today that are completely delusional about the reality on the ground here, both what can happen going forward and what the current state of affairs are today. It's like there's an alternate reality which exists online, which is completely detached from reality, or not just online, on the streets as well.
Why do you think that alternate reality became so widespread? I mean, probably after October 7th, it became even worse, obviously, right?
I think there's I think the biggest factor that plays into this, so obviously the war places a huge spotlight on Israel. But I think that would have happened anyway. What was different this time is that the algorithm rewards insanity. And so if you post a video of a small crater in the road where a piece of shrapnel fell from the sky, you'll get 1,000 views. If you show a video of an entire building collapsing, which has been generated by AI with the title, is whatever tower in Israel collapses after Iranian barrage of missile, you'll get 1 million views. And so the algorithm rewards fantasy. It rewards the crazier the narrative, whether it's to do with the Epstein files, whether it's to do with what's happening in Israel, more fantastic the claim, the more the algorithm pushes it. And so it's this vicious cycle of charlatans and grifters posting anti-Semitic, anti-Israel content deliberately to misinform, and then the algorithm rewarding the clicks that they get, and then those accounts growing exponentially.
Now, what do you think about the mainstream media? Do you think that the mainstream media's coverage of Israel is driving this in some way?
I think the mainstream media, the legacy media, is being pulled along by the internet. I think the greatest example of that is the Epstein files. The media pushes the narrative that Epstein was a Mossad spy. There's zero evidence. It's all pure speculation. When you get into the files and you read them, there's a stronger connection to Israel, as there is to America, as there is to Russia, as there is to multiple nation states. But the story that attracts eyeballs, the narrative that attracts clicks is the Mossad. No one's clicking on the CIA story. No one's clicking on the Russia story. They're clicking on the Israel Mossad story. So, yeah.
Now, you've spoken to countless people over the years, both online and in person. What pushed you to take that direct approach?
So I was inspired by our cousins. So I'm a street activist. I learned my chops on the rough streets of London. And what I quickly realized was that in those days, I was very much in the interfaith world. I still am, coexistence kind of guy. And I kept on encountering Muslims. And they'd set up a little stall and they'd have a number of Quran books and some compelling leaflets on why you should abandon whatever positions you hold today and embrace Islam. Now, when I first started doing street activism, I'd watch the Dawah guys. This is the form of Islam is called the call to Islam Dawah, and they'd maybe convince one person in 1,000 to convert to Islam. But then they started filming the interactions. And the argument that convinced one person is suddenly seen by 100,000 people. And suddenly you're convincing 100 people to abandon their pre-held beliefs and embrace Islam. And I realized that was a hole in our narrative. There was nobody, or a hole in our defenses. There was nobody on the streets engaging ordinary people and then filming those interactions to broadcast to as many people as you could possibly get. And so I started doing street level advocacy, but filming it and pushing that out to, back then, tens of thousands, but that's grown to millions of people. The average video I publish now gets 1 million views across all my platforms. And that's the power of digital media. The arguments that can convince one person can suddenly be in the living rooms of millions of people for very little effort. I've done documentaries for television and they put like 6 months of production into it, huge budget, flying people around the world. And I can't say the stats, but if I had a video that performed as well as these big BBC documentaries that I'd been involved in, if I have one video that performs that badly, it's a bad video. And they've spent a fortune and broadcast it into the living rooms of a sizable number of people in the UK. But I can create 10 times that with 1 day's worth of work on social media. So the power of social media is phenomenal at reaching huge numbers of people, which is largely what I do now. I focus on reaching as broad an audience as possible and breaking out of the echo chamber and reaching those hard to get audiences like our Muslim friends or working class Brits or whoever the target may be for a particular video.
Wow, that's incredible. What has the feedback been like for you? Both positive, negative,
So
stands out.
So positive, there's not a day goes by where I don't have just a huge amount of mail and complimenting the work, telling me that they're a Muslim from the Emirates or from Somaliland or from wherever, and they're very grateful for the content. Iranians, there's a huge Iranian audience out there that just loves consuming pro-Israel content, pro-Jewish content. Why? Because we have a similar struggle. We're brothers in arms, quite literally at the moment. So that's the positive. The negative is quite different. I've had knives pulled on me. I've been in multiple violent altercations. The rising levels of anti-Semitism is the key thing that accelerated our aliyah. We moved from the UK to Israel, and we would have ended up here eventually, I'm sure. But looking at just the rate of anti-Semitic incidents, the increase and the personal, there was barely a day went by when I wouldn't receive death threats from people who could be living 2 minutes from me. You realize that actually the future for the Jews in the West, certainly in the UK and Europe, is not looking that rosy. We decided to act with our feet and we left for Israel. So reception is incredible. I use AI analysis to monitor the sentiment of the comment section to see if the message of the video is resonating with the target audience, and overwhelmingly it is. But the negative is it doesn't matter how many nice comments you receive on the internet, how many minds and hearts you win from hard to reach audiences, it's always going to be outweighed by the level of hate and the ferocity of that hate that you receive if you're in this space.
Now, could you think of one interaction that really stayed with you?
So negative, I mean, there's probably too many to actually no. Negative. The worst for me is not the perpetrator. So one of the reasons we left the UK wasn't just because of rising anti-Semitism, but an absolute failure of the state to deal with it. And so there's a video on my YouTube channel, which everyone can go and watch, Joseph Cohen or Israel Advocacy Movement, where I'm at a place called Speaker's Corner, which is the only place of free speech in the United Kingdom. UK doesn't have free speech like America, but there's a corner of a park on a Sunday you can say what you like. And so, as you'd imagine, everyone's speaking about the Jews. There's no Jews there because why would a Jew wander into a park full of hostile people? But everyone's talking about them. So when a Jew turns up, they get very excited. And so there's a video, and I'm talking to the crowd about Israel. And a crowd of young Muslim youths forms around me. And a street gang starts saying they're going to beat me, they're going to attack me. And so I square up to them, you're not going to do anything. And then a Turkish German puts his face in my face and starts going, Jordan, and starts screaming. It sounded like scenes from East Germany. He was effectively saying, Jordan, raus, Jordan, and swearing in German, which I'm not going to, for the sake of your podcast, I'm not going to get you deplatformed. And okay, this is getting quite serious. There's a gang of Muslim youths screaming they're going to attack me. There's a Turkish German screaming, Juden raus, in my face, effectively. And then I pan the camera to behind my shoulder, and there's two police officers just sitting there, just whistling like they're just trying their hardest not to make eye contact with me, and certainly not to intervene in the situation. There's been other times where I was jumped by a Muslim gang, and on camera you can see the policewoman, and I don't blame her. She was 4'0". Look at this gang of Kurdish Muslims jumping me, turn around and quickly walk off the other way. That's my personal level, but it got so much more serious when you look at real life situations, like real terror situations. Our local kosher supermarket in London was subject to a terror attack. A Muslim terrorist came in, started asking people what they thought of Israel and Palestine, pulled out a huge knife and then tried to stab people. Now, in the UK, we don't have guns, and so his only weapon was a knife. One of the brave young Jewish Orthodox workers gets the shopping cart and pushes it and stops the guy from stabbing anyone. The Shomrim, a local Jewish neighborhood watch organization, they turn up and detain the guy until the police arrive. It's an open and shut case. So I'm going to say, he's come into a supermarket. He's tried to stab Jews. It's clearly anti-Semitic. He's asking people's thoughts on Israel, Palestine. Are you Jewish? How many years do you think that this terrorist received for such an attack in the UK?
2 months.
Not even. Not a day was served in jail. And I'm scratching my head and say, if our enemies can wander into a Jewish supermarket and try to murder us in cold blood, and they don't serve a day in jail, but heaven forbid somebody send out a tweet where they misgender someone and they'll find themselves incarcerated for 6 months. This is not a country that can protect its Jews. And there was multiple incidents just like that. There was an incident where a convoy of cars drove into a Jewish neighborhood and started announcing on megaphones they were going to do the most obscene acts of violence to our daughters and our mothers in very vulgar language. They had the license plate. They had everybody that was in the car. Not one of them served a day in jail. The case was dropped. And this pattern repeated itself again and again, and tragically culminated in a murder in a Jewish synagogue at Yom Kippur, just gone. And this was an absolute failure of the British state to protect Jews. And so it's not just the individual incidents that happened, it's the inability of the state to deal with these situations.
Do you think that the current government there is just afraid of the Islamic community? Is that the reason why they're acting this way?
It's going to sound a weird thing to say. I don't think they're afraid of the Muslim community. I think they're afraid of being perceived as racist. I think the perception of being a bad person is much, much stronger than their fear of Islamic violence or terrorism. And so I also think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of Islam. What you'll find is whenever there's a terror attack, you have the same sound bites come out, which is Islam is a religion of peace. Don't look back in anger. They play a song and the issue with this is it does a huge injustice to the Muslim community. because there's a huge difference between the guy who came into our supermarket and tried to stab Jews and the average Emirati, very pious Muslim who adheres to the 5 pillars of Islam, gives the zakat, fasts on Ramadan, and this guy who has wandered in and tried to murder Jews because of his religious and political convictions. And the British state muddies them all together. It's just Islam. And there's a complete inability to deal with radical Islam, a complete unawares. It's much easier when you give examples. So at the beginning of the October 7th war, there was a protest. Well, there was many protests in the UK, anti-Israel protests. And what you see there's one video that went viral where there's a Muslim holding the black standard. Now, the black standard is often confused as the ISIS flag. It's not. It's completely different. It's the Shahada. It's the Islamic declaration of faith in white text, Arabic text, calligraphy, and then the color of it is black. And the black standard was typically held by the caliphate when they went into battle. So it's a battle flag, which is why many groups like Al-Qaeda, Daesh, etc., they adopt these colors because it represents war. There's a guy waving this flag and people circulate the video, and I retweeted the video, and the Metropolitan Police replied to my Twitter, and they replied underneath it, uninvited, no one tagged them. Don't worry, guys, this isn't the ISIS flag. We've consulted our flag experts. It's just a declaration of faith. And so I commented under it. So I gave the context of what the flag actually used for. So no one said it was ISIS. It actually is the flag of Al-Qaeda, but we'll ignore that. More importantly, the guy is screaming, the Islamic State in Arabic, Lanat al-Yahud, curse upon the Jews. And you guys have come to the defense of this guy, defended his flag, said it's just a declaration of faith. And because you haven't even had the thought to send this off to your Arabic-speaking colleagues, you don't realize that this guy is cursing the Jews and calling for the Islamic State, which is clearly a prescribed terrorist organization in the UK. There are multiple incidents where the British police have just been absolutely unable to differentiate between Islam and violent Islam. Some people call it Islamism. I don't like the term because no Muslim calls himself an Islamist. And it's the same when it comes to jihad. I remember there was a protest outside the Egyptian embassy where they're calling for the Muslim armies. We call on you, wage jihad against the Jewish state. The police get involved. Guys, we've spoke to our experts again, and they've informed us that jihad just means in a struggle. So my jihad could be I like cake. Maybe my jihad is to cut down on cake. But these guys aren't calling for it. They're not calling for a jihad against chocolate cake. They were calling for a jihad against the Jewish state in black and white, clear as could be. And the police are coming to their defense because they're terrified of being branded racist. They're terrified of social unrest. The one thing that could destabilize the government is mass protests against radical Islam. I think Tommy Robinson in the English Defence League, where they would mobilize huge protests. And all of these things culminate, and the state is absolutely terrified to act. They're just terrified, ignorant, incapable. Whatever the reason, it leaves Jews and other minority communities very, very vulnerable.
Some people that I speak to say that, there's no really such a thing as radical Islam. There are people that follow the Quran to a T, and there are people that don't. There are verses in the Quran, like last night I was actually watching one of your clips where you quote the Quran. You said that, for somebody who's not as, Muslim, you should slit their throats, right? And so is there a distinction between radical Islam and Islam? Can you make that distinction?
So I think there's a huge distinction. There's centuries of Islamic thought grappling with the verses and the questions that we raise. I think Islam is like any religion, not any, certainly the Abrahamic religions. There is enough flexibility within the text to take that religion to a dark place or a positive place. So the verse in question is, فَإِذَا لَقَيْتُمُوا الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فَضَرَبَ رِقَابَهُم. When you meet those that are kuffar, strike their throats. Now in context, there's 3 ways of reading this verse. The first is it was talking about a particular battle at the time of Muhammad, and it was relevant to those kuffar at that time, those non-Muslims at that time. The second is it's still applicable today, but only at a time of war. So you can't just walk down Oxford Street in London and strike the throat of the kuffar. The third, which are the guys I feature in my videos, are the ones who believe, actually, no, this is a heta, permission, to slit the throat of all the kuffar at any time and any place, unless they've submitted to Islam and they're paying the jizya. And in which case, most Muslims, even the most radical, believe those that are paying the jizya should be offered a degree of protection. So you can't just chop their throats because they're a different religion. And so I think it's a gross misrepresentation of Islam to say that Islam in its pure form is capturing the slave girls, it's slitting the throats of the disbeliever. Just in the same way that we have a tradition that there's never been a rebellious son that's been killed, there are many Muslims that have strong traditions going right back to the beginning of Islam in the Hadith, etc., which present many of the more problematic verses in a different light or contextualize them to a particular time. But because they are there, and Islam doesn't have a mechanism like the Beit Din Hagadol or any other mechanism, you can't just excommunicate somebody because they have a more literal reading of Islam or a more violent reading of Islam than someone else. The problem that Islam faces is there is no mechanism. It's all based on the manhaj and the madhab that you belong to. So the manhaj is the framework in which how you understand Islamic law, and the madhab is the particular school of Islamic jurisprudence that you follow. So Salafi would be the manhaj, and Maliki could be the madhab, the school. And yeah, people massively simplify the complexity of Islam. It's a 1400-year-old religion with 2 billion adherents today, and some of the greatest minds of their time grappling with the problematic verses within the text, just in the same way that you'll find Jewish rabbis grappling with verses around slavery today, or maybe some of the rebellious son in previous years.
Now, in a lot of your debates, you reference in Respond and with Quranic verses. When did you start memorizing them? And what are some of the texts you find that they misunderstand the most? You can speak a little bit about that.
So first, there's a chutzpah for me to tell Muslims they misunderstand their own holy book when my knowledge is this, and you have people that are hafzing Quran, memorize the whole thing, went through Sahih Bukhari multiple times. So it's a chutzpah for me to say they misunderstand. However, one of the things that attracts me to Judaism is a 5-year-old child can come up with a great question and pose it to the greatest rabbi. And if the 5-year-old's right, the 5-year-old's right. And so Islam is no different. And so when I read the Quran, the most misunderstood verse, quite conveniently, but obviously it's what I spend a lot of my energy on, is a verse in a surah in a chapter called Al-Ma'idah, where it's Moses speaking to the children of Israel, and he says, "My people, your qawmi udkhulu anta al-adha muqaddasa, the holy land, allati kataba Allahu lakum," that Allah, God, has written kataba to you. And so it then goes on to explain how the Jews rebelled against Allah. They didn't have Iman. They didn't go into the land. And so they wandered the desert for 40 years. Very similar. And then a man called Yusha ibn Nun leads the next generation into the land. And then from there, for centuries, the Jews are in the land until Al-Isra tells us there are 2 times that they're kicked out for causing fitna, corruption in the land, which correlates beautifully with the Babylonian exile and the Roman exile. And so when you speak to Muslims, they don't have a grounding in Jewish history. The history of the Jewish people comes from the Quran and from the Islamic literature, which borrows heavily from our texts. So much so that the Quran doesn't even make sense without our text. For instance, I mentioned the children of Israel, Bani Israel in Arabic. And we said after him, talking about Pharaoh, to the children of Israel, well in the land. Settle in the land. Settle being a better word, I say. Settle the land. You speak to Muslims and they say, but Bani Israel doesn't mean the land of Israel. So I say, what does it mean? It means the children of Israel. So I ask them, who's Israel? Israel is Yaqub. Where does it say that in the Quran? Start looking at the Quran. Nowhere. Nowhere in the Quran does it say that Yaqub is Israel. They have to come to the Torah to get there. And so the verse I think that they misunderstand the most is the most relevant to coexistence and peace in this region today, is that I believe the Quran explicitly in black and white assigns rights. They often say Allah isn't a real estate agent. But if you read the Quran, he seems to have a property deed here written for the Jewish people to dwell in Al-Adha al-Muqaddasa, the Holy Land. And so I think this is the verse that Muslims most misunderstand about their own book. But again, my knowledge is this, and there are shayukh, great scholars who would read it very differently to me. But I think they're wrong. I'm the little 5-year-old with the good question.
But do you find that when you challenge someone using their own framework, using their own book, how do they usually respond to you?
So the first thing they'll do is they'll try to educate me. And then when they realize on this particular niche, I maybe have more knowledge than them, at which point they usually just defer and say, look, I'm not a man of knowledge. You need to speak to my sheikh. You need to speak to this da'i, this person who gives dawah online. And so I reach out to all the du'at, to all the greatest Islamic personalities on the internet on a regular basis. I've got receipts. I can show them. And the debates never materialize. I need to go away and research. And I think it's because it's an area where when they start to read and they go back to the early tafsir, what I'm saying makes much more sense. So, for instance, one of the most common things you'll hear is in Al-Isra, that is a chapter of the Quran. It says about the exiles. Most believe that there's one exile it's talking about because they don't know about Galud Bavel, the Babylonian exile. They only know about the Roman exile. And so they'll say they were kicked out, and the Quran's prophesying that you're going to be kicked out again and we're going to kick you out. And so they misunderstand. So then what you do, you take them back to the Meforshim, the early tafsir, like Tabari, and it reconciles perfectly with what I'm saying. The early understanding was there was 2 expulsions, and that's what the Quran is referencing. And so Israel's existence, when somebody really begins to study the text, is a huge theological challenge. And I think the solution isn't to discredit, trash Islam, because you'll never win. I think the solution is to show Muslims what their own text says about Israel so they can come to terms with the existence of a Jewish state and it not to be in contradiction with their own religion. And what I tell Muslims is black and white. When the Jews behave and follow Allah and they follow the Sharia of Musa, of Moses, they stay in the land. When they rebel against Allah, when they don't follow the Sharia of Musa, of Moses, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings be upon him, when they don't do that, then the land spits them out. And I have a lot of success with quite educated Muslims when taking the time to take them on this journey of their own texts, not going to our texts at all, relying almost entirely on what their classic texts say.
How often do you run into people that have a greater knowledge than you in the Quran?
I say the majority of people I speak to have a greater knowledge of me in the Quran. I'm a specialist. I specialize in these little areas I've focused. So it can come across in an exchange. I'm some sheikh. I've got all the Islamic wisdom. Libraries filled with books on fiqh, and it's not the case. I specialize in very niche areas, and it's the same way in the rabbinic world. It's the same. You'll get your samicha in a particular area. You specialize in slaughter. You specialize in whatever it may be, and maybe you have an extensive knowledge in the other areas, but you specialize. And I don't have the extensive knowledge. I just have the specialism. There are areas where I have a lot more knowledge than the average Muslim, but the average Muslim probably collectively, I mean, I'm talking religious Muslims from observant Muslims, overall will have far more knowledge than me because they've been raised in that tradition. I was raised in a Marxist-Leninist tradition. It's a very different world. And so, regularly encounter Muslims that know more than me. I've never encountered a Muslim whose defeated sounds too arrogant, but I've never encountered a Muslim that's been able to pick apart the argument that I'm presenting. It's a very simple argument. The Quran says we're supposed to be in the land. We seem to be preserved in the land after decades of conflict against much mightier enemies, at times fought by refugees with one rifle for every 3 soldiers, like in 1948, against the most powerful militaries in the region, armed by the global hegemony Britain with British officers. Somehow, miraculously, this ragtag group of refugees were able to withstand the most powerful armies. And I tell Muslims, I don't think that's coincidental. I think we're supposed to be in the land. I don't think we're supposed to be killing each other, but I think Jews are supposed to be in Israel. And I've never, to date, lost a debate on these terms, but that's probably because I haven't debated the right person. There will undoubtedly be a Muslim out there who would run circles around me. But I think the arguments stand up. And so, and the reason I say that is I'm an Amarit. I'm a simple Jew, not even a simple Muslim, a simple Jew. And if someone with as little knowledge as me is able to run rings around people that are far more informed, It's the strength of the argument, not the strength of my knowledge.
I think just the fact that you've memorized these verses and they look at you, I don't think they expect you the way you look to be able to quote these verses in Arabic. I think that's, to me, the optics of it looks, very impressive. It's
And
not
to
just-
them, it's very confusing as well, because most Muslims don't speak Arabic. People, if you're in the Israeli Palestinian space, you see it as the Jewish Arab, then you assume that all the Muslims in the world speak Arabic. The Quran's in Arabic, they make salat, they pray in Arabic, but they don't speak Arabic. And it's the same with Hebrew. Most Jews outside of Israel don't speak Hebrew, but their prayers are in Hebrew, the Torah's in Hebrew, and it's the same for Muslims. So when they encounter a Jew that's reciting their book in Arabic, it creates a real imbalance, and it throws them completely off guard. And that's not why I do it. I do it because I think it's important to show that you've taken the time to actually study these texts. Because one of the biggest arguments you'll encounter is, well, you can't possibly argue about the Quran if you don't understand the Arabic. So the first thing you have to do is learn what the Arabic words are. Where's kataba used elsewhere? How is it? And so it really strengthens the argument when I do that, I believe.
Yeah. Now, why do you think that the anti-Israel sentiment is growing among younger generations, especially in the Western countries? Is there something that they're fundamentally misunderstanding, or is it coming from multiple directions?
I think the truthful answer is the anti-Zionist movement has spent decades building up infrastructure to propagate the narrative that has consumed the West. On October the 8th, they were pushing the genocide narrative. On October the 8th, there's no possible claim for genocide on October the 8th. I think when that machinery encountered an uneducated youth, not uneducated, I mean, on the conflict, an uneducated youth that's susceptible to algorithm manipulation, and they're witnessing the horrors of war live streamed and filmed in a way that's never been witnessed before, because this isn't Ukraine, this isn't any other conflict. Gazan activists have built up infrastructure to broadcast their message for decades. Since social media came about, they've been at the forefront of online activism. And so when this machinery met an uneducated population and were able to broadcast very horrific images that would pull on the heartstrings of any human with a heart. And I think we didn't stand a chance in terms of combating the narrative. I think it's a gross failure of the Jewish establishment. There are organizations which have annual budgets in the millions and millions and millions of dollars. And I don't know what they've been doing since 2014, but they consume money, they spend money, and then when the horde came knocking on our door and the narratives the tsunami struck, they were completely unprepared. And it was largely down to small channels like ours to fight the fight. We're reaching millions of people. I don't know about you, but I survive on very little money. I had a good job in the UK before it came to Israel. And yeah, I'm able to outperform in terms of statistics every single funded organization in the UK, and probably most of the funded organizations in America. Not all of them, but most. And that's with nothing. And so we should have spent the last 10 years preparing for this in the same way that they were. Why is it that on day one, they were pushing hashtags and narratives around genocide, and we were still scratching our heads? We were not ready, and we were not prepared, and they were. And I think that unlocked a global audience to many people as well. So it wasn't just the youth. What also amplified it was the Muslim world. Influencers on the right who traditionally been against Muslims spoke very critically of Sharia law, etc. Someone like Tucker Carlson, all of a sudden find themselves with huge Muslim platforms, Muslim audiences, because they're talking about Israel. And so you see this convergence of different communities who realize that their best performing content it's not always about money, it's also about reach, etc., is going to be the Jews. And so you've seen so many influencers pivot. Someone like Piers Morgan. I'm not going to say Piers Morgan's an anti-Semite. I don't know what's in his heart. but he has platformed every major anti-Semite on the internet. And this is against the backdrop of him refusing to platform Tommy Robinson because he said Tommy Robinson is an Islamophobic bigot. Why would I give him a platform? He's given Dan Bilzerian, he's given Candace Owens, he's given whomever you think, they're a regular feature on his platform. And I did some analysis, and of his top 200 videos, I've forgotten the percentage, but a very, very high percentage of them were all about Israel or the Jews. And it's this combination of major audiences that people can tap into, machinery that had been built over decades that was just ready to take advantage of a moment like this, and a hugely uneducated youth that are generations away from the Holocaust.
You're now living in Israel during an ongoing war, of course, since October 7th, but now it's getting very back into it. What has that experience been like personally for you, your family? What does daily life actually look like right now for you?
The first day I arrived, the first week we arrived, was when the first barrage of Iranian rockets came in April 2024. And I've always fancied myself as a bit of I'm not scared of anything. I'll go to any neighborhood. I'll wear a jumper that says Zionist. No one's going to intimidate me. I remember the first time the siren went, I was absolutely terrified, shaking. I tried to film a video, like shaking 3 seconds. It was my first real siren. And so that was scary for us. I remember hearing what I thought was a tank rolling down the street outside our apartment. We lived in the middle of Jerusalem, and I hear in the middle of the night what I think is a tank or something rolling down the street. So I thought, look, I'm a content creator. I've got to rush outside and film whatever machine is making this awful noise. I've got to capture it. So I don't tell my wife. I sneak out, get my camera, and run around the corner to film it. And it's the garbage man collecting the bins. An hour after, or 30 minutes, whatever, after the Iranian missiles had come firing down on us, they were collecting the garbage. And that's the Israeli spirit for me. I've driven the length of the country since last week. It's business as usual. There are changes, and you can be in areas which are much more affected in a much worse way than others. And there's been some devastating strikes, but generally the spirit of the Israelis is inspirational and inspired me. And so now for us, it's business as usual. Today we went out for lunch. We check our phones. We make sure that it's not going crazy in that moment. I think the scariest thing is the notification. I don't know if you've heard it, but it's like that. I always jump out of my skin in the middle of the night. But the actual daily life for us, thank God, has been, all things considered, has been not too intimidating, scary. So much so that I would encourage anyone to make Ali. I don't see there's a real risk. I don't want to downplay the risk of what's going on, but one of the greatest miracles we're witnessing is Israeli defenses. I hear interception after interception. The windows shake. The building can sometimes shake. But we've created technology which can shoot ballistic missiles out of the sky, saving thousands and thousands and thousands of lives. These are everyday miracles that we just take for granted. The fact that my house has a mamad, a bomb shelter. I get an 8 or 4 minute warning, depending on the type of missile that's being fired from Iran, to prepare to go to the bomb shelter. If we are under the area where it could either be intercepted or it's targeting, we have a minute and a half to get into our bomb shelter. It's incredible. No other people that I'm aware of, no other nation has any defense system of this level. And it's miraculous. It truly is a miracle that saves so many lives. So my daily experience in the war has not been one of fear or terror. I've been inspired by my neighbors to just go about my life as normal and, not to live in fear.
Now, how has this move to Israel changed the way you approach your advocacy? You're now at ground zero. Before you were in the UK. How did it change it for you?
This is going to sound really harsh. When I was living outside of Israel, I thought the rise in anti-Semitism was all-consuming. I thought that Israel was dependent. Israel needed me. Israel needed the Jews outside of Israel to get on those streets and defend Israel. Israel doesn't need us. And since moving to Israel, what I've realized is that the future of the Jewish people is in this land. And I'm very grateful for anyone that is out there fighting Israel's case in the West. But make no mistake, the fight is here. What will secure Israel's future is Jews in this land. And since moving to Israel, I've barely paid any attention to politics, local politics in Britain, because for me, that's where I used to live. That's where the Jews used to live. It will be a memory. It will be told that this was one of the places we lived, just like we used to live in Egypt, just like we used to live in Spain and Portugal. But unless something dramatically changes there, which isn't going to be driven by Jews, there is no future for Jews in the UK. I feel so confidently in saying that, which is why we voted with our feet and we moved to Israel. So the biggest thing that's changed with my activism is I don't look at the diaspora world. I don't look at Hutzlaritz. I look at Israel, and the relationships I'm trying to forge are with nations that want relationships with Israel. And I think that's been just it was a change which I never anticipated. I assumed I would just be the guy who lived in Israel and did activism for the Jews in the UK. When I first moved here, I imagined I was going to fly back to London every other month to get footage from the streets. I've been back once, and that was to see family. And so the fundamental change has been what I look at and who I speak to, because the future is here. I think Europe is just going to be a graveyard of Jews. I don't mean that all the Jews are going to die. I mean, all that will remain there is the bodies of our ancestors.
Joseph, I greatly appreciate your time and your perspective. I think you're a great inspiration for many people out there, especially myself, to see what one person could do. I want to thank you for joining me. If you want to leave us with a final message and tell people how they could find you, I'm sure most people know how to find you, but for those few people that don't, please.
Yeah, so if you don't know how to find me, Joseph Cohen, Israel Advocacy Movement, on everything, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, whether you're a boomer or Gen Z, or what is it? I don't even know what the next one's called. Is it Alpha? The generation after Gen Z. You can find me on TikTok. But yeah, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for hosting.
Thank you very much.